Chapter 8. I suppose that the most frequently used words in Anna's writings and speaking were Mr. God. Running them a close second were the words that she called the W words. W words were those words that began with WH, and these, so far as Anna was concerned, were question words. What, which, where, why, who. All question words. The well-behaved question word. It was how. How was undoubtedly a question word, and according to Anna, should have been spelt W-H-O-W, or more exactly, W-H-O. But we'd already got a who, so it was obvious to her that somebody must have taken the W from the front of the word and simply stuck it on the end. How. How was more or less a well-behaved word. It did at least contain the letters W and H, which indicated that the question was coming up. Question words were odd in many ways. Perhaps the strangest thing about the W question word was the fact that if you substituted the letter T in place of the letter W in a question word, you were face to face with an answer word. Well, for the most part. Answer words were the words indicating something. They pointed at something. You didn't point with your finger, you pointed with your tongue. Any word that began with the TH was a tongue-pointing word. What is a tram could be answered by that is a tram. Where is the book is answered by there is the book. When and then were also a couple of question and answer words. The problems of which and thitch, why and thy, and who and though were obviously problems that could only be cleared up given a little time. Anna was satisfied that W words were and were meant to be question words in the same way that Th words like that, the, those, and there, etc. were and were meant to be answer words. With regards to language itself, Anna was convinced that it could, by and large, be divided into two parts, the question part of the language and the answer part of the language. Of the two, the question part of the language was the most important. The answer part had a certain satisfaction, but was nowhere near as important as the question part. Questions were a sort of inner itch, an urge to go forwards. Questions, these real questions, had this about them. They were risky things to play about with. They were exciting. You never knew quite where you were going to land. This was the problem with places like school and church. They seemed to be more concerned with the answer part of language than with the question part of the language. The problems that places like school and church raised were absolutely tremendous because of the kind of answers they gave you. Certainly, you could make up the questions from the answers given to you, but the trouble was that so often this kind of question had no real place to land. You just kept on falling forever and ever. No, the mark of a real question was that it landed somewhere. As Anna said, you can ask the question, do you like scudding? It certainly looks like a question. It certainly sounds like a question. But it don't land nowhere. If you suppose that it was a real question, if you suppose that it really landed somewhere, why, you could go on asking questions about it all your life and still get nowhere. Anna was certain that heaven was, certain that angels and cherubs and things like that were real, and that she knew more or less what they were like. At least she knew what they were not like. For one thing, they weren't like those pictures of angels with nice feathery wings. It wasn't the wings that bothered her one bit. It was the fact that they looked like people that bothered Anna. The possibility that an angel, let alone would want to blow a trumpet, filled her with the deepest dismay. The idea that, come the resurrection day, Anna would still have the same number of legs, still have eyes and ears, still be generally constructed after some present pattern, was to her an idea too monstrous to contemplate. Why was it that grown-ups insisted on talking about where heaven was? The whole question of where heaven was neither here nor there. It was immaterial, utter nonsense. And why, oh why, were angels and cherubs and things like that, and goodness me, even Mr. God himself, represented by human people? Oh no, the question of where heaven was one of those non-questions. It had nowhere to land, and therefore it was no question fit to be asked. As Anna saw it, the question of heaven was not concerned with where, but it was concerned with the perfection of senses. Language was hard put to it when trying to describe or explain the concepts of heaven. But then language depended upon the senses, and it therefore followed that the grasp of heaven was also dependent on the senses. These pictures, these statues, and these stories about angels simply shouted aloud the fact that the perpetrators of these monstrosities had no idea what they were on about. They merely showed quite clearly that angels and such like were simply men and women with wings stuck on. They were burdened with the same kind of senses as we were, and as such were no fit creatures for heaven. No, whatever the description of heaven was, and that was really most unimportant, it didn't describe a place, but its inhabitants. Any place could be heaven where the senses were perfect. Mr. God's senses were perfect. Well, it stands to reason. To be able to see us over impossibly immense distances, and to hear us, and to know our thoughts, were not unreasonable characteristics of Mr. God, or, for that matter, of the angels either. But to represent them in stories, paintings or sculptures with ordinary ears and ordinary eyes and ordinary shapes was just childish in the extreme. If the heavenly hosts had to be painted, then they ought to be represented in such a way as to show the perfection of their senses, and since language depended upon the senses, the perfection of language too, really. The strange insistence of the Sunday school teacher, Miss Haynes, and the Reverend Castle on using words seeing and knowing in such a clumsy way was a very sore point with Anna. The Reverend Castle talked about seeing Mr. God, about meeting him face to face in a sermon one Sunday morning. He never knew how close he was to a disaster. Anna grasped my hand tightly, shook her head violently, and turned to face me. All her efforts were directed to dampening down her inner fires, which would have consumed the Reverend Castle if they had been let loose. When it comes to fires, old Nick had nothing on Anna. She could make the fires of hell look like simple glowing embers. In a whisper that echoed around the church, Anna said, "What the hell are you gonna do if Mr. God ain't got no face? What'll he do if he ain't got no eyes? What then, Finn, eh?" The Reverend Castle faltered for a second and then pressed on, dragging with him the heads and the eyes of the congregation. Anna mouthed the words, "What then?" "Search me," I whispered back. She pulled at my arm and signalled me to come closer. Her lips plugged into my ear socket. "Mr. God ain't got no face," she hissed. I turned my face to her and raised my eyebrows and asked the question, "How come?" Plugging in again, she says, "'Cause he don't have to turn round to see everybody, that's why." She settled back in her pew, nodding her head at her own certainty, and folded her arms with a full stop. On our way home from church, I asked her what she had meant by "he don't have to turn round." "Well," she said, "I've got an in front and I've got a behind, so I have to turn round to see what's behind me. Mr. God don't." "What's he do then?" I asked. "Mr. God's only got an in front. He ain't got no behind." "Oh," I nodded, "I see." The idea of Mr. God having no behind struck me as deliciously funny, and I tried hard to suppress the giggles. I didn't manage it. I exploded. Anna was a bit puzzled at my outburst. "What are you laughing for?" she asked. "Just the idea of Mr. God having no behind," I chortled. Her eyes narrowed for a moment or two, and then she grinned. The grin fanned her eyes into flame, and she lit up like a Roman candle. "He ain't got one of them too." Her laughter ran along the road, erecting little barricades as it went. The all too obvious and self-satisfied Christian worshippers bumped into the laughter and frowned. "Mr. God ain't got no bum," sang Anna to the tune of "Onward, Christian Soldiers." The frowns turned to scandalised looks of horror. "Disgusting," said the Sunday suit. "Little savage," squeaked the Sunday boots. "A limb of Satan," said Albert Watch, dangling from the waistcoat. But Anna went on, laughing with Mr. God. On our homeward journey, Anna practised her newly discovered game with me. In the same manner that she launched her spiritual being at Mr. God, so she launched her physical being at me. Mr. God ain't got no bum wasn't a joke. She wasn't being naughty or just a silly child. It was just an eruption of her spirit. With these remarks, she hurled herself at Mr. God, and he caught her. Anna knew that he would, knew that there was no risk involved. There was really no other way. It just had to be done. This was her way of being saved. Her game with me was similar. She would stand some distance off, run towards me and launch herself at me. The run towards me was deliberate and active. The moment after her launch was completely passive and limp. She made no effort to help me catch her, no effort towards her own safety. Being safe meant not doing these things at all. Being saved meant trust in another. Being safe was easy. You simply accepted Mr. God as superhuman who hadn't shaved for about 6 months or so. The angels looked like men and women with wings stuck on. That cherubs looked like fat little babies with wings and couldn't support a sparrow, let alone a couple of stone more of chubby infant. No, being saved was for Anna only possible in that act of creative violence to the images of being safe. Every minute of every day, Anna lived. She totally accepted her life, and in accepting life, accepted death. Death was a fairly frequent topic of conversation with Anna. Never morbid or anxious, simply something that would happen at some time or another. And it was better to have some grasp of it before it happened than to wait until the moment of death and then get all panicky about it. For Anna, death was the gateway to possibilities. It was Mum who provided Anna with the solution to the problem of death.